Thank you for listening to the Mental Insights podcast. This is your host, Brendan.cutuli, and it's such a pleasure to have you here today, Elana. It's going to be a wonderful conversation, and I really think we'll be able to bring about some great topics as we speak today. My first question that I really like to ask my audience is, when did you really first become in tune? When did you first become in touch? When were you first introduced to mental health and the field around it? Whether it was hearing what mental health was or whether it was a personal experience that you had.
Well, I think in some way I've always been aware that I had my experiences, emotional experiences, and they weren't necessarily like everyone else. So I think it was a slow, gradual process of thinking about these things. And really, I didn't wake up to the fact that I struggled with depression until I was about 30 years old. And I was in a job where I was working with pregnant and parenting teens, and one of my responsibilities was to screen the teenage parents for signs of depression. And so for me, that was a really moment of reckoning for myself to say, wow, I fit a lot of these markers and I have a much better life in some way than some of these teenagers, but I think I'm having worse mental health outcomes. So for me, that was the first time I really just owned and admitted to myself, I struggle with depression and I might have a problem. And it's only been, by that time, it'd probably been already 20 years that, or maybe a little under, that I just thought like my life was in constant upheaval and I felt like I was on this roller coaster all the time. And it dawned on me also at that time that not everybody else in my peer group is having a life that's constantly falling apart and constantly going through all these intense challenges. And like, wait, this is maybe not normal.
Thank you for sharing that. No, two things really came up as you were sharing that. One being the difference from an experience versus the awareness of knowing it. For myself included, I was younger, experiencing a lot of these emotional, physical trauma and abuse, but it didn't. It took me about 6 to 8 years to finally come to terms with, okay, these are some negative experiences and thoughts that are starting to roll into my life, and finally become aware of that. So that was one thing that came up. And the other, I think, is definitely such a challenge. And I truly don't know too much about it, but it's when you're working firsthand with someone to work through these issues, you still have to be cognizant and aware that you can have these thoughts and experiences as well. So whether
Mhm.
you're a therapist, whether you're a social worker, whether you're working through these issues with people, you can still be experiencing it as well. And it's not that you're you know, the light and shining armor of knowing exactly how to get through the depression, the anxiety,
Mhm.
but you've been able to experience some of the issues, and you obviously know the correct ways too, but it necessarily will not transpire within your own life. So how has that worked within yourself? Because I think it's truly a different instance in terms of, you're helping someone through an experience that you personally have, or third hand have experienced some sort of issue. So it's very interesting to see, as you're coaching people through this issue, but
Mhm.
then in turn you're saying, oh, okay, you're starting to become aware that maybe you've experienced the same thing. So if you want to share a
Sure.
little insight on how that
So
can play a part.
there was definitely a time in my life where I struggled with depression and I was getting a little bit of movement and a little bit of traction of understanding what was going on for me and then how to work with it and how to change it. But I still got to these places of being really depressed that I didn't know how to get out of, and I didn't understand what they were related to. Now, fast forward to where I'm now, and I'm definitely helping people work with their mental health and work with the issues that are coming up. There are times when things come up for me that are pretty intense, and it's funny because when I'm in the middle of it, I'll go, oh shoot, like I've failed. How can I be a person that helps other people? Like, how can I have written a book about happiness? And then, but usually what happens, um, sort of on the other side of that, is I really say, okay, well, I have these tools and I did write this book, so let me put them to use for myself and let me use them to see if it can make a change in my life. And so often it does. So often it brings me through to the other side. Or even if it feels like in the moment I wasn't really able to change the like intensity or the heaviness of my experience, when I come through to the other side, I understand what was going on for me in a way I didn't used to. I'd just be like, I got depressed and I have no idea why and I don't know what it was about, and now I feel better. Now, even if I'm in a moment where things are feeling really closed in on me or dark or heavy, when I get out to the other side, I sort of see it. I'm like, oh, that's what that was about. That was me dealing with this situation in my life, or that was bringing something up from childhood, and that's why I was having those responses. So, and I do say to my clients that sometimes, and it's true for me as well, sometimes there are things that show up in your life and issues that show up in your life that even if you have the best tools and you have the best skills, you just need an outside perspective. You just need some outside assistance to move to the next level. And so that's true for me as well. And I have people that I reach out to when I'm getting to that place of like, okay, I'm not sure what's going on, or I don't feel like I'm able to shift it myself. And so then I'll ask for help, which is a really important piece, I think, of when you're struggling with something. Just being alone in your own head can be crazy making, and just having a conversation sometimes can make a huge difference.
That's a great tip. I love that you brought that up. The one being, if you're helping people through this instance, that other perspective is so important. But if you're the one experiencing it and seeking out the help, reaching out and asking a friend just to listen, or asking, going to a different type of, therapist or clinician
Mhm.
to speak about and just get that different perspective is all that you may need to really change the way
And
that you focus on your health.
super important to know who. I think I had a conversation about this recently with someone else, but it's super important to know who you can go to for help and who is a safe person to go to for help. Because if you reach out to just anyone or any one of your friends, it might actually end up making you feel more crazy, or have a harder time than if you really reach out to the people either that are trained to support you or maybe have been through similar things, or that you just know. Like, I've developed sort of understanding of knowing who's my safe people. If I'm kind of freaking out or don't really know what's going on, I know who my safe people are that I can talk with, and that it's going to ultimately make me feel better rather than just alienate me. And another thing that we were talking about of like identifying your experience as a mental health experience, I know that for me, for a long time, I was afraid of being diagnosed, being thought of as crazy, being put on medications, all those kinds of things. And that's, I think, why I resisted for so many years the label of depression or the label of mental health diagnoses, because I just wanted to be seen for who I was. And I think that's true of a lot of people that I work with. It's like our system and our way of addressing mental health is, we call it a disorder, we call it a disease. And so there's inherently this label of being broken that comes with it. And I didn't want that label. I really resisted that for so long. And I've sort of shifted my perspective around mental health and come from a different place, which is really, it's not a disease, it's information. And everything that shows up in your world is information that you can use to your advantage. And when you learn how to unpack the information, understand what's underneath it, and this has been true for me even in levels of like suicidal level feeling depression, that when I really could unpack it and get to what was at the heart of it and what was underneath it, it actually had some useful information or wisdom for me. And so my whole approach is about empowerment and understanding sort of you might have mental health difference, so to speak, and it might feel like an illness and it might make it hard to function and make you feel crazy, but there's a lot of really good reasons why you're freaking out, that if you understand them, then it's like, my experience has been, I'll go from feeling incredibly contracted, like curled up in a ball, like the world is caving in on me, to a sense of expansion and possibility once I really unravel all the information that's contained in that experience.
That's incredible. I love that comparison in terms of it's information. That's really all it is, when you're diagnosed with whatever type of mental health issue, it's all about becoming aware of that information. And whether it's that you have triggers to a specific trauma, to a specific experience, whether you have low levels of serotonin or dopamine, it's all information in terms of
Mhm.
where you are not even lacking, where you have a lower percentage of an experience, or whether it was just a negative experience. But it's all about information about what you can improve within the future. So it's learning where to improve yourself, where to become better in these specific areas. I love that you brought that up, because it really is all informational tools and a way to enhance and approach what you really can do moving forward. So I think it wraps up into what you're speaking about earlier about the stigma that's surrounded around mental health being what people are really able to understand and really uncover is that it's not a illness compared to what physical health is. I think that's a good comparison, because you break your leg, you have this massive injury, but you're not looked at as somebody who's severely pain struck, or dealing with this harmful issue. But when,
Mhm.
say, you have this debilitating issue within your mind, it's something that is brought and seen to be some overarching issue that is in your control, which I think is such a wrong way to view it, because the mind is such a complex being that has so many different neurotransmitters, so many different
Mhm.
ins and outs, that you can't really cause and procure that it's that person's problem, or that they're crazy, or that they really don't have this same mental stability as other people. And really, there's a lot of different factors that go into
Mhm.
what someone is going through. There's past trauma, there's different types of experiences that they're going through within their present. It's what they're focusing on within their life. Is their lifestyle a healthy one? There's a lot of different factors, and I think to look at someone and judge them based on what their mind is leading them towards, I mean, they still are in a responsible manner to how their mind will act, but you can't change overnight. And I think that's the conversation that we need to start having is, how do we view a mental health issue, and how are we going to continue this conversation and start to understand that it happens everywhere. And one, I think, comparison that is truly so important is I've been seeing it all throughout the internet recently. It's 1 in 5 people suffer from a mental illness, but 5 in 5 people have mental health. We all have mental health. It's all
Mhm.
something that we need to deal with and focus and face each day. And it's not something that we could just put on the back burner and say, we haven't had an injury recently, we haven't had an illness recently, so we're not going to focus on our mental health.
Right, like health, like we all as human beings are in various degrees of physical health. And so we're all at any given time in various degrees of mental health. And there's so much in what you said. There's like, one of my perspectives is like, again, if you find out what's really going on under the mental health issue, it's not a disease or something broken about you. It's some way that your mind, your being, yourself is trying to cope with something or trying to work with something. And so sometimes depression is a really what I would call an emotionally appropriate response to a circumstance or condition that you find yourself in. And I know we talked before about also the cultural context in which people experience their mental health. You can look at statistics from different places in the world, and you'll find that different cultures and different communities have higher or lower rates of mental health issues. And it does have to do with the context and conditions. It does have to do with the community that you're in. And my question is, are you in a healthy, life supporting kind of environment? And American culture, for a large degree, has had a breakdown of community, a breakdown of cultural norms, a breakdown of social support. And so to me, it's no wonder and makes good sense that so many people suffer from depression, because our very basic human desires and needs are not being met. Now, some people have, you know, I was reading a book and they were talking about your emotional set point. And so some people have sort of more happy dispositions overall. They just start at a happier sort of baseline. And then some of us are more sensitive to what's happening in the world around us. And so if you have a higher set point, you might be able to sort of endure more trying conditions in your life that really don't support your well-being. If you're a little bit more sensitive, or you have a more fragile constitution, or if you think of it in physical health, like your immune system, some people have a really strong immune system, some people don't. And so the people that have like a weaker emotional immune system, so to speak, or just a little more susceptible to sensing what's going on, feeling the dysfunction in our culture, are going to react and respond before the people who are very resilient and have that high tolerance for adversity are going to. And I see that, and I see a lot of my clients like being like, how do I fit in this world? It doesn't make sense. I feel crazy. It's like, yeah, because it is kind of crazy, and you're noticing it before other people are. And that's been a helpful piece of not blaming myself so much for certain things. Like, oh, I'm actually having an emotionally appropriate response to these conditions. And if I change these conditions, I might feel very differently. So that's one thing to look at when you're looking at your mental health. What are the context and conditions that you're in, and do they support your well-being? Now, if you've grown up in like a dysfunctional household, or all you've ever known is like context and conditions that don't support your well-being, it can take a while to realize that there is something else possible. There is another, that this isn't just the way the world is. Like, you actually could be with people that kind of are treating you in a kind and caring way. And it's not just you that is broken and screwed up. I think a lot of people get that, is when you're experiencing abuse and the people who are abusing you aren't willing to acknowledge their part in it, then it's like, oh, well, must be me. I must be the screwed up one. Versus if you can start to really acknowledge, like, no, that's really not kind. And it took me a long time to see, like, oh, this is what it feels like when people are really being good to me. And then I could start to see the contrast. But if you've never had that, it can be tricky to get to the place where you understand this is not normal, and like, I can have this contrasting experience where people actually are being kind and considerate to me.
Such a valuable topic to bring up. I think set and setting, time and place, it's so important to understand, become aware about, because it has a direct reflection with how your mental health is. For myself, when I was younger, I really was not aware of that. I was putting myself around the wrong people, and
Mm-hmm.
I was really not aware of how your relationships truly affect not only your mental health, but just your actions, your thoughts, your experiences. It can completely change the way that your life goes about. And for myself, throughout many years, I was focusing on the wrong things. I was trying to seek out ways to alleviate and suppress pain rather than trying to be with people that want to unleash and unravel some of the things that we've experienced and try to move forward. And
Mhm.
I was really with people that were just dragging me down, that were really helping me face the, you know, the quick insights, the quick, prosperity, the quick, easy way, the quick highs. And it wasn't really beneficial at all. It was just bringing me into an even darker place. I think relationships are definitely one of the first things that you really can focus on. I've really started to put really positive, influential people that focus on the same values that I
Mhm.
do around
Mhm.
myself. And it really speaks not only to yourself, but people around you. So if you're meeting some new people, if you have new friends, when they start to see who you surround yourself with, they say, oh, okay, like this is where you are in your life. This is what you're trying to focus on. And no wonder why you're really doing well within this area, or
Mhm.
you look so much more happier than when you were in that dark place. So I think the set and setting is so important
And
because
on relationships, I would say relationships are one of the biggest pieces. And so there's a thing that happens is that we conflate and confuse like emotionally appropriate responses with what's going on with us. Like somebody says something unkind to you and it hurts and you have a feeling about it, with like internalizing like I'm the broken one. So that's one thing, is teasing out like what is actually you, like, or somebody's gaslighting you, like telling you that you're not having the experience that you're having and you start to feel crazy. It's like, oh, I'm starting to feel crazy because this person is invalidating me reality, not because I'm actually crazy. And I see those getting fused together so much. So if you're in an unhealthy environment around people that are unkind to you and telling you all these negative things about yourself and who you are and how you are in the world, if that's all you've known, it's very easy to then internalize it and think it's something wrong with you. If you get out of that environment, you see like, oh, the rest of the world doesn't see me this way. It's a totally different experience. And I love that you brought up the relationship piece, because that's something that I talk a lot about in my book and feel like is so crucial, is look at how do you feel about the people in your life? Like, how do you feel when you engage with them? I actually had a moment, and I share this in the book, of just getting to a place of total overwhelm, frustration with my social relationships. They weren't working for me. I was feeling really kind of crummy about myself. And I went and I spent maybe 2 or 3 days in a cabin in the woods that my family has. And it's like I started to unravel, and I started to like all of the stuff that was coming at me. And I started to feel better about myself and to feel sane again to some degree. And I told myself at that point, I would rather be alone for the rest of my life than have to spend one more moment in that crappy feeling social interaction. It's like, wow, when I'm by myself, like I feel fine. I feel okay. When I get around these other people, I start to feel crummy about myself. I'm not quite connecting. And I agree that one of the fastest things that you can do to improve your mental health is make a checklist of all the people that you regularly interact with in your life. Then look at how do you feel about those relationships? Like, does it uplift you? Does it make you feel good about yourself? Or do you have like some discord in there? And then either like, are there relationships that absolutely need to go? Are there relationships that you need to distance yourself from, and or adjust in how you're relating in some way? Or are there people that like you want to be moving toward? And look at who are those people, and then just start making choices that line up. So the ones that make you feel horrible, get as far away from them as you can as possible. Maybe some you're like, okay, yeah, I can relate in this way, but not in that way. Like, I'm not going to call them when I'm having a mental health issue. That just really doesn't work for me. And this person, I just know, like, I just feel so great when I'm around them. So I'm going to go toward that person, and then I'm going to look for more opportunities and more people in my life where I do really feel good. Another thing, actually, I just wrote a post about this on Facebook, is that so many of us, when other people treat us poorly, we internalize it and think it's something wrong with us. And so something I've started to do when I look at my social relationships and somebody's not calling me back or they're not being very responsive to my efforts to engage, I used to go like, what, like, why doesn't anybody like me? What's my problem? Things like that. And then I was going like, oh, wait a minute. They just don't want to show up. And like, I'm a fun person. I'm coming from a good place. I want to connect. I have a lot to offer. So really it's on them that they don't want to show up. And it really has nothing to do with me. And it's just helped me shift so much how I relate, and then move toward the people that are like want to say yes to me, and then stop taking the ones that are sort of saying no or not returning my phone calls or whatever that is so personally. But it's like, why do we blame ourselves when other people are not treating us well?
It's always the easy resort for our mind to go to, and I've experienced it definitely plenty of times. It always brings back to yourself, and really what you have to understand and start becoming aware of is if you're doing all that you can, you just have to say, all right, if they want to come and show up like you're saying, then they will. And it's all about being that two-way street. It's a collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
If you have friends that really want to do the same things, focus on the same values, then you both have to give the effort. And I've spoken about this before as well, in terms of therapy being that collaboration, or speaking with someone being that collaboration, because it
Mm-hmm.
has to be a two-way street. It has to be you and someone else doing it. It can't just be you giving in all that effort.
And when you stop blaming yourself or thinking that it's something wrong with you, which if you've been a little kid in a dysfunctional or abusive situation, you've probably ingrained very deeply that when something's not right in the world, it's because there's something wrong with you. Because to have your family, have your parents, and I also talk about this in the book, have something be wrong with the people that you depend on for your survival is just really way too scary. So it's much easier just to say, oh, well, something wrong with me, and if it's wrong with me, then I can fix it, and then it's not like total annihilation. Um, but I think a lot of us have carried that over. And so then when somebody's showing up with unkindness or not really showing up for us or taking advantage of all this kind of stuff, the habit can be to blame ourselves. And then what that does is it keeps us in repeating that dysfunction, because we think, oh, if I change, then this relationship will change. Then I can have the kind of connection that I want, whatever it is, instead of recognizing. And again, if you haven't had the experience and you don't understand that there are people out there that would genuinely love to be in your life and love to connect with you, you can stay in this small space of trying to figure out the relationships that don't feel really good, rather than just saying, oh, well, like, I know that I'm doing a good job and I'm going to go find people that want to participate in the same way.
Totally. I think that's why the development of humans is so crucial, and what you're brought up in is so viable to who you are after you grow up. I think the relationship between, obviously family, obviously with the setting that you're in, plays a huge deal in terms of how you grow up. And once you create that change to moving into a different setting, a different lifestyle, a lot of people bring those past, experiences and thoughts with them, and creating that change is so hard to do for a lot of people, because they think it's the norm. They think it's what everybody does, which I think is why there needs to be a better way that we start to really bring up our children today, because it needs to be more on a concise decision between the two, and allowing the children to start to make decisions and start to become aware while they're young. I really wanted to bring up the topic within this, because we were speaking about relationships, and we're speaking about finding the right set and setting for someone. But for some people, say it's someone who's listening, who's within a family environment, who it has to stay in their home, but it's a negative experience. It's a place where they experience a lot of trauma, or even if it's someone living in a place where they can't necessarily get out of the job that they have, they don't have the money to move and pick up to another location, so they may become aware that their relationships, that their lifestyle may not be right, but they don't have the means to change it. In terms of what you've been able to experience, what could someone do in that scenario to try to make, the best outcome that they possibly
Mhm.
could in a scenario such as that?
And there's a chapter in my book where I talk about that, and it's looking at the context and conditions, and then looking at what you can change. And sometimes things can't be changed right away. And so it's like, if you are living in a situation that is really toxic for you and not working for you, it's like it might feel like there's no way out. And I think I put the story in the book of living. I was like, my work and my living situation were all tied up in the same thing, and it was becoming intolerable. I didn't know where to go. It was a rural area. I didn't know how to get out. And finally, I just said, "That's it. I don't know, but I'm done." And I just told the person I was with, "I'm done." And the next day, something opened up for me, to some place to move that was going to work out for me. And so sometimes it really is that thing of, there's this expression that says, choice creates awareness, awareness doesn't create choice. So you're always like, you'll be in a stuck situation, you're always looking for, like, what's going to be around the corner, or what's the thing that I need to know first so that I can make a move. Sometimes you make a choice to go. So I made a choice to leave that situation, and it was like I took a step. Sometimes you have to take the first step before you can see what's around the corner. And it's, so we want to know what's around the corner before we make that step. And it can be terrifying because it's risky, and it's challenging. So that's one thing, is just like, do the one step that you can do, make the one thing, one choice that you can make. And then there is a place where, I mean, it's a little harder with children because they don't have the psychological development and so forth, but it's like, you get to rule your mind to some degree. And when you understand how your mind works, and you understand more of what's going on for you, that I talk about in the book, and what you're really aware of, because sometimes it feels like mental health is like something that's happening to you and you have no control over, and you don't have really any power over your thoughts, and you just feel crazy. But if you understand what that is and what all that information is and how to work with it, it can help shift your experience. And then there are some people, like, let's say you're locked up in jail and you really have tried every recourse to change your experience. You're the option that you have is working with your own attitude, your own mind, your own um, internal process. And I was reading this book on choices that happy people make, I think it was called. And one of the stories was this little girl that grew up in a horrific situation, but she just started playing this imagination game, basically, where she imagined herself in a different reality. And she imagined herself having different kinds of experiences, and imagined herself being really happy. And it was a way that she could get out of the pain and the suffering and the abuse of her childhood, was to use her imagination. And I think that's true of any of us who are stuck in, some of the stuckness of being in a situation that doesn't work for us is we have lost hope and we've lost imagination or creative vision and possibility. So just opening yourself up to, like, hey, I wonder what else might be possible here. What could I dream of that I've never dreamed of before? Like, if you allow, so much when we're in that hard space, we're telling ourselves lots of stories about how it is, all of the reasons why it can't change, all of the fixed points of view that we have, right? All the conclusions, like, well, I can't leave because, I'm never going to find a job, blah, blah, whatever. There's so many things that we tell ourselves that are restrictions that aren't necessarily true. So if you go from, like, telling yourself a whole bunch of conclusions to starting asking yourself some questions, you might start to see things differently. Like, well, who could I talk to? What else could I do? Is there something else I haven't thought of? And that just opens the mind up to some more creative idea rather than like my life sucks and I'm stuck here and I can't do anything to change it.
Those self-reflective questions are so vital, and they offer such great insight into what you can do to move forward. It shows you really how powerful the mind is. The
Mm-hmm.
mind can create your own reality, such as you actually put that momentum, you put that force, that energy within what you're truly pronouncing, within your thoughts, within your experiences.
Yeah, and that's so interesting too. Is and something I've been paying a lot more attention to is like what in my experience is actually just a story that I tell myself. And I have this story about like being social or not having people to like, be social with or whatever. Another night I really wanted to go out and I couldn't connect with everybody was busy who I was reaching out to. And I realized like how much meaning I had put on that and like how I was so isolated and I had no social networks and then it was so funny because it all kind of like went poof like, oh, I do not have to go into this crazy place that I've gone to throughout my life about how I have no friends because it's not actually true. Just nobody in the last minute that I was like, let's go out and do something was available. And it was, I just almost laughed because it was like this whole like intensity and energy that I had around this suffering that I've had for so long. I was like, oh, what is that like? And my internal process around it and feelings around it just completely shifted. I was like, oh, I'm okay, and that's not even true. Cool. And so just ask yourself, like, what are you telling yourself is true, or what stories do you have that you repeat over and over again that if you just kind of looked at them as slightly different way or opened yourself up to something else being true could just change. And then another question that I really like is like how much of everything that's going on in your world is actually yours. So stories about yourself, like beliefs that you have, like, oh, is that just something that my dad used to always tell me about myself? Is that his voice? That's not actually mine. Okay. Or me being an empathic and sensitive person, like I'm feeling a lot of other people's feelings. Like, is that mine? So asking yourself that question can really shift things. And even like loneliness. Loneliness is something that I think a lot of people who struggle with mental health feel, and it's something that I've certainly felt a lot in my life. And just like in the last maybe 6 months, I started to go like, wait a minute. Like when those feelings of intense loneliness would show up, I would say, is that even my feeling of loneliness? Is that mine? And so often I'll like be like, oh no, it's not. I'm aware of like other people in the world that are really lonely. I'm actually not that lonely, even though I'm alone a lot. Like I really like my life and I like my alone time. And it was so interesting just to say like, wow, so much of the things that I've carried around is like, I'm lonely, I have loneliness, and then like, oh, that wasn't mine either. And so for me, and not this isn't true for everybody, but for me, one of the big factors of my mental health is being incredibly empathic and incredibly sensitive to the world around me. And I see a lot of people who are struggling also in similar ways have that same thing. So you might want to try it out. Start asking some questions. Are you just really aware of a whole bunch of stuff that isn't even yours and it weighs you down, makes you feel crazy? And what if you started to separate out what's you and what's everybody else? Because that that is the thing that makes the biggest difference in my life. And even now, I'll get like, oh gosh, I am so caught up in somebody else's reality right now, and I feel kind of crazy. Like I need to get back to me. Let me get back to me. Let me do me. And when I'm doing me, I'm usually happy. I usually feel good about myself and my life.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I'm so happy that you brought up those topics. The one really being about the thoughts that you may have can really affect the way that you experience different events, experience different people, and how you procure these images, these experiences can completely change the way that you live your life. I think the way that you direct your thoughts, the way that you direct your conversation to people can be very impactful. One instance that I really think is important is people, especially that experience mental health issues, some can curate it on their own, and some ways that they can do it is through lying, through creating, these personas, these perceptions that may not necessarily be true. When I was younger, I was lying, I was stealing, I was not being the person that I truly was, but it
Mhm.
ended up revolving into this cycle of negativity, and I was harming myself and harming other people. I think whether it's lying, whether it is being, negative to the person around you, I think it can then spiral down into, a really negative path. Can you speak more about how, the thoughts that we even have to ourselves, but to other people, can affect the way that we experience our day to day?
Well, I think it's kind of everything, like where they say where your mind goes, your body follows, and what you appreciate appreciates. And so where you put your attention is going to affect the kind of experience that you're having. There's a lot of talk in maybe the personal development world about gratitude, and there really is a sorry, there's a blip on my screen,
Okay.
um, distraction. So let me get back on track. So yeah, the way that you think about things, the way that where you put your attention is going to really affect how you experience life. And in my work, actually, I've gone a lot more from looking at like, okay, if you have an issue in your life, let's unpack it. Let's figure out what the problem is. Let's figure out where your limitation is. And now let's change it to something else, which there's still some value in that. But I've really redirected a lot more of my attention on like what it is you want to create and what do you want to focus on in your life, and like does it really matter where you're limiting yourself? Sometimes it does, but sometimes what really matters is just having the positive vision and looking toward the positive vision. And I know even in my own life I can start to look at like, maybe I want to change something in my life. I can start to look at what's blocking me and where am I stuck, or I can start to look at what is it going to take to change it, and what's necessary and what do I need to do. And there seem like similar questions in some way, but that it's very, it shifts the focus in a really interesting way to just like, okay, this is where I'm going and this is what I want to create, versus when you focus a little bit more on where you're stuck, then you're just understanding more about how you're stuck, or you're reinforcing even the idea that you're stuck. And that can be sort of a conclusion and a solidification, rather than like, oh, okay, like, so I wonder what it really is going to take to move out of my house and go live somewhere that feels better to me, rather than like, oh, well, like, what are all the reasons why I'm stuck, and how do I change like all the issues that I think I have around it. And so like, well, what am I going to do about it? If that makes sense and answers your question.
Definitely, yeah. It's all about that change in perspective. I think that's one overarching topic that really happens throughout mental health field. Ones that are experiencing a mental health issue is that change from focusing on the negative to focusing on the positive. Obviously, in terms of us really seeking out new and appreciating life, it's by focusing on what the experience was if you did have a traumatic issue. But in terms of making a new life, in terms of making a
Mhm.
new lifestyle, it's about focusing on the positivity. And it's
Mhm.
really when you find that change to be able to say, all right, I need to focus on the positive, focus on what I can change rather than what has happened to me in the past or what's happening to me right now.
Mhm.
It's a big differentiation in how you can live your life.
Yeah, and there's an interesting piece of that, because I think there's an extreme of positive thinking and focusing just on the positive and not being willing to acknowledge the pain of something, or the actual experience of something. And for me, it's been really helpful to basically see things for what they are and name things for what they are. Like, okay, that was abusive, and I I can see the dynamics that were going on there, and that was really unhealthy for me. And that was, and there's something about like naming the truth and seeing things for what they are. Oh, that person was actually being really unkind to me, or that experience was really shitty. It, to me, there's a freedom in that, and there's not this weird cognitive dissonance where you're trying to convince yourself otherwise. And my experience also is that when you really own what that experience was for you, and you have compassion for it, you have empathy for yourself, like, oh, that really was a hard experience, then you actually free yourself from it more quickly, and then are able to move on to, okay, now what, and how do I get over it, and how do I move on, how do I move forward with my life, versus if you've never been allowed to really say like, no, that sucked, and you're always trying to, it's the same thing. We talk a lot about forgiveness, right? And um, forgiveness is wonderful and a super freeing experience when you do it at the right stage in your healing. But if you've been traumatized or abused or had something horrible happen to you, and you jump right to forgiving, and you don't get to be mad, you don't get to have an emotionally appropriate response, what I've found is then forgiving almost becomes like you're trying to be compassionate and understanding, which are super, noble values, right? But most often, what I see is that form of compassion and understanding is missing out, including you in the equation. You're not acknowledging that actually that person was quite a jerk to me, and really I was very much impacted by their behavior. And it doesn't matter if I understand that they had a horrible childhood or why they did what they did. I still deserve to be taken well care of and to honor my own experience. So I really think there's a place that has to happen in the realm of positivity, forgiveness, all that kind of stuff. There's a place where you have to bear witness to your own experience and how it impacted you. Because when you reclaim emotionally appropriate responses to what happens to you, then you can see things for what they are, and you can have the ability to choose and navigate your life in a different way. Because to me, feelings are information, and they're telling you about your environment, they're telling you about your experiences. If something shows up and it leaves an uncomfortable feeling, that's telling you something about the set and setting, as you like to say, that you're in. And if you've been taught to cut that off your whole life, you're going to keep drawing to you experiences that don't feel good to you, that feel abusive to you, and you're going to wonder why. It's like you have to learn to honor your own experience and your own feelings, and know that yes, you can be understanding and compassionate, but do that after you've really taken some time to acknowledge the hurt and the pain that you experienced, to heal a little bit yourself, to put yourself in a place where you're not going to be re-injured, so to speak. So you got yourself out of the place where you were hurt. Now work on forgiveness, because you're safe. But first you have to be yourself safe, and that's emotionally safe and physically safe. And same with positivity. First you have to deal with whatever is showing up, and then you can look to like what's next or how to focus on the positive. But when you focus on the positive and deny the actual experience, that can be a contributor to feeling insane and struggling with your mental health even more.
Totally. It seems like, throughout feelings and emotions, we really need the spectrum. We need to experience it all. And I think that's why, what we were talking about earlier, you can't just focus on positivity. You can't just focus on negativity. You need to experience it all. And I think that's the beauty of it. I think that's what a lot of people are seeing today is, I need to have those days where, all right, I may see the negative side of things, but it
Mm-hmm.
offers that duality. It offers that experience that I do have these lows, but then I have the neutral settings where, life is what it is. You become to accept and come to terms with it all. but then you have the positive sides as well. And you need that all to create the perspective, the experience that, you're not always going to be the happiest person. You're not always going to have
Mhm.
all the wealth in the world. You're not going to have the best life possible. You're still going to experience it. And that's why you see with a lot of people who are multimillionaires are coming out to saying today that it's not about the money. Money, if only, creates more problems throughout your life. It's creating them a lot of mental and physical harm. And I think
Mhm.
that's why we're starting to see that you really need a full spectrum of the emotions, of these
Healthy
feelings.
emotion, yeah, a healthy emotional life. And as you're talking, I'm thinking there's sort of like two levels, right? There's the sort of mind created negativity versus like the emotional experience. And when you're in touch with your emotions and your feelings, and you have room for the full spectrum and you let them flow through you. So somebody says something and it's like, ouch, that hurt. And you let yourself feel the hurt and you let it move through you. It's not negative or positive. It's just like that experience of the moment. And like, and sadness as well. It's like when I have a wave of grief and I just let it flow through me, it just moves so nicely. And then there's that place of negativity where we get into like a story that we tell ourselves that really brings us down. And so the emotion so we're having then emotional feelings in response to that story. So there's sort of different things going on, right? What stories are you telling yourself, and how are the stories making you feel? And then also, what's just your emotional flow? And are you just having emotionally appropriate responses to things that happen in your life? And I think truly healthy and truly happy people, they have the range of emotions. They don't suppress them. They just move through them. And so then you come back to sort of your homeostasis more quickly. Like you get angry and you look at what the anger is and you listen to the anger, because anger is sometimes an emotionally appropriate response to things, especially when people invalidate you or violate you in some way. Angry is a boundary setting, it's appropriate. It's like, okay, what's making me angry here? Wow, I'm pissed off because that person just totally invalidated me, and like I'm mad. Okay, so I'm gonna validate myself, and now I move through it. Versus like if you spend your whole life being told not to be angry, like then it's all stuck inside of you. And I know that some depression has been because I haven't been allowed to be angry, and I was actually really angry, but I had to put the lid on it because that's not nice to be angry, whatever all those other things are. And as soon as I allowed myself to be like, no, I'm legitimately angry, I'm pissed off right now, it was like such a relief to going from like I want to die and I feel depressed to be like, oh, I'm just angry. I'm really angry, but it feels so much better than depression. That makes sense.
Totally. You really hit it on the nail there of, speaking about when people look at emotions, they're not negative or positive. You know, an emotion always has a purpose. It always has an intention, but it's when you become aware
Totally.
of that, when you learn the cause of the emotion and then how you can change, your present moment in terms of using that emotion into a more direct and, beneficial approach to your present moment. It's we
There's
all
this
go on.
there's this quote that I include in my book because it just changed so much for me. And it was that your feelings are not up for negotiation. They are the lived experience of the moment that you're in. And that was just so amazing for me. It's like, because how many people do you know? Like, I certainly knew them, and I used to be one of them. Like, oh, I shouldn't feel this way. Oh, I'm just overreacting. Oh, my basically my feelings are wrong. It's like, no, your feelings are what's happening in the moment that it's happening. You can evaluate them later, but it's like somebody says something and you have a feeling of sadness. It's just what's happening. There's no arguing with it. Like, the cloud went over the sun. It's just what's happening. Um, so that's that to me just it gave me such relief because I had such wrongness about feeling how I was feeling. And again, those feelings are indicators of needs, of what's going on in the surface, under the surface, how you're being impacted by another person's behavior. So if somebody says something to you and it doesn't feel good to you, that might be information you should pay attention to instead of go, why am I feeling this way? What's my problem? Etc. Like, oh, that just didn't feel good to me. What can I do to like make it feel better?
Exactly. No, and it perfectly wraps together all that we've been talking about. When you originally were speaking about the stigma about mental health, it's when you're experiencing an emotion, it's not necessarily that you are procuring this emotion in the spot due to that experience. It's you experience this emotion and then you react to it. You start to understand, okay, why am I feeling this way? And when people allow or disallow you to feel these emotions and come to terms with these emotions, it creates the awareness that you're not welcome or you're not allowed to feel this emotion, which is what you were talking about earlier. It's, if I am looking at a mental illness being this stigmatized view that this you have to be crazy, you have to be mentally ill in order to feel these type of feelings, in order to feel these emotions, that's why there's so many people sitting back today that aren't seeking the help. That's why so many people are saying, no, I do not struggle from a mental health issue because I don't want to be a part of that 1 in 5. I don't want to be a part
I
of
don't
that
want to be
group.
right. So it's the stigmatization and the again, like you, you may just, I mean, in my work, I see over and over again when a lot of my work is getting to the subconscious layers, getting to what's underneath the surface around our mental health, our emotional well-being, and over and over again, it's like whatever you're going through, like there's actually a rhyme and reason to it, and it makes perfect sense when you really understand it. When you don't understand it, it does feel like you're going crazy. You don't know what's going on, but once you kind of unravel, it's like, yeah, no wonder I'm feeling like a little bit nutty right now. It's totally in response to all of these other things, and um, I think a lot of, at least a fair degree of mental health is suppressed awareness, things that we don't want to look at, things that we don't want to see, feelings that we don't want to have, things that other people don't want us to see or to know. um, and when you can really open your mind up to the truth of reality, the truth of whatever's going on in your world, it can create more freedom. Like my example of realizing I was angry after being depressed for being very depressed, and then, oh, I'm angry, that was a thing I wasn't allowed to acknowledge or to see, and once I did, it really shifted things for me. And I think it's true, like, just I think of some of the people I work with, I'm like, what's going on? And wow, oh, you're aware of somebody else's feelings, or you're aware of a circumstance in your life, or maybe you don't want to be aware of a circumstance in your life where somebody's treating you a little bit poorly. It's like, wow, once you open your eyes to all of those things, it's like, oh, I'm not crazy. I'm really just not crazy. um,
Exactly, and that's something that just speaking with another person, another psychiatrist, therapist can offer. So if anybody, any of you that are listening right now, if you're one of the people that are saying, oh, I may think that I'm crazy, but I'm not going to seek out that help due to that stigma. Just speaking with a person through what you're going through, you'll start to realize that there are countless people that are experiencing the same issues, that are saying to themselves, oh, I think I'm crazy. I think that, this is something that only I experience, only I go
mhm,
through. But in turn, you're going to start to understand that it may not be the same exact traumatic experience or the same exact relationship that you've had with the person, but it's all within similar context, and you'll be able to uncover what it is that you truly are going through, and you'll start to understand that you're a lot more normal than what you truly think. And that's just your mind playing those tricks, like we were talking about earlier, in terms of telling
Mhm.
yourself these instances that aren't necessarily true, but it's what your mind's trying to make and cope with the thoughts and the experiences that you're having. So if you guys are listening and you haven't reached out for help yet, please do, because we're all experiencing the same issues. We all have mental health. We all have these thought patterns, these experiences that bring about a negative light, and we all need to support each other and go through this together. So I'm so happy you brought that up, because I truly, taking that step to just reach out, just to speak with somebody, can
Mhm.
make it, can bring a 100-pound weight off your shoulder and say, all right, I'm not the odd one out.
Yeah, and also speaking with people, I mean, partly I wrote the book because I wanted people to have, so the book Finding Your Unhappy is my book, and I wanted people to have sort of insights and tools that I just didn't find elsewhere that made a big difference for me, and also to say like, hey, I went through this experience. I went through this journey. I thought I was crazy and screwed up for so many years of my life. And then I started to shift my perspective and I started to work myself out of it. And I totally understand if you don't want to go to therapy or don't want to deal with mental health, because I didn't either. But there is a way, and there are people who get it and understand it. And also to move from the things that I thought were the most broken or wrong with me actually turning out to be gifts, like being empathic and being sensitive to other people's feelings. Like that's what allows me to be the kind of coach that I am, and provide the insight to my clients that I do, is because I can feel into what's going on for them and I can connect it for them and I can help them see what's going on for themselves. And so I just, if I had a wish for people out there struggling with mental health and mental illness, is that, well, first of all, you're not sick. I don't even like the word mental illness, like, and that if you could really understand what's going on for you in a different way, that you could come to such a appreciation and almost awe of yourself, of how you have been seeking to cope and to navigate and to work with very sometimes very adverse situations in your life, and that actually it all makes sense and it's all perfectly reasonable and normal. You just haven't learned how to understand it or interpret it. But when you do, and it's been true for me and it's true over and over again with my clients, like the places they think they're broken or screwed up, they see like, oh, no, actually that was my subconscious trying to protect me, or that was this, that, or the other. Like, I'm not a flawed human being. I'm actually a beautiful person that is trying just to navigate this world and has been dealt some difficult stuff. And I've really done the best I could to cope. And now I just need new insight and new understanding so that I don't feel horrible or like I just want to get off planet Earth.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I love that insight, and it really speaks to, who you are today, what you were able to overcome, where you are now, and who you've been able to help thus far. I think it's
Mhm.
a true testament to, you experience firsthand what you're able to help a lot of people go through and overcome today, which is a true testament to any of you guys out there that is struggling with an issue. You need to understand that there are plenty of days, years that you can continue to grow, that you can overcome and face these issues. And there's so much positivity and light that you can reach and grasp within, that can help you get over these hurdles, that can help you experience everything that you need to, and you'll learn so much more as you go throughout this process. And it is an everyday process. It's not going to
Mhm.
be beautiful flowers every single day. There's going to be dark times, but there's also going to be that happy and joyous light. So it's all about the daily process that you need to go through. So thank you for sharing that.
Having, I would say, just to add to that, and having the tools, insight, and understanding that help you navigate that in a healthy way. Because I think so much we're just not, oh, you have this diagnosis, let's just put you on medication, or it's like let's get some depth of understanding of what's going on and give you some really great tools. So if you want to check out my book, actually, I would love to offer to your audience, you can get a free copy of Finding Your Own Happy at findingyourownhappybook.com. And there's a whole bunch of tools in there about looking at what's really going on for you, how to work with it, the things that really helped me shift out of some super dark places in my life. So please, if this conversation has had any value for you, I'd love it for you to check out my book. I really wrote it for people who maybe are going on the same path that I have been on, or struggling with the same things and are not finding answers elsewhere that are really working for them.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And I'll be sure to have all of the information to Elena's work, her book, her website, all of her ways that you can contact her to see more about the work that she does, and to reach out and connect with her and to speak more and see how you can really make change within your life, and how Elana can help you move forward through anything that you're going through, whether it's something similar or whether you just want to reach out and ask a question and just
Mhm.
offer your thanks for her insight thus far. The last question I think will really go towards a lot of what you've been able to experience thus far through writing a book, through understanding a lot of what you've been able to overcome thus far. The last question I really love to ask my guests is, if you were to be writing a book, but it will be about your life story. So it'll be about, different time periods throughout your life. We want to have each chapter represent a frame of a year or two, a time period that was very monumental, was very valuable, that provided some inspiration within your life. Within the past year or two, within this past development, through this last phase of what you've been able to uncover, experience, learn, and grow through, what would your chapter be called throughout this phase that you're currently going through? And tell us a little bit about why that is.
Okay, so something that has really been showing up for me recently. So the chapter might be called um, "You're Not Crazy," and the thing that has really been uh, so clear to me is this uh, understanding of gaslighting. And if you don't know what gaslighting is, it's a form of basically psychological abuse, where a person is denied their experience of reality, denied their feelings, basically told that they're wrong. And there's like very extreme sort of intentional forms of manipulation, where somebody will basically be lying to the other person, and then tell that when the other person questions it, say, it's all in your head, what are you talking about? But I think there's a much more insidious form of gaslighting that I experienced throughout my childhood and then into adulthood. And I'm just understanding how much that feeling of being crazy and wondering if you're crazy is actually connected to the experience of gaslighting and people telling you that you're wrong when you call them on mistreating you or calling them on something that's going on in your life. And little kids, so if you grew up in a family where you just couldn't find your stability, and you couldn't find like a sane place, and you felt like you were crazy a lot of the time, there's a good chance that what's going on is that you were being gaslighted and you weren't being considered or acknowledged for your experience. And I almost think I'm going to write another book about this, because I think it is a big piece of mental health stuff that people struggle with, is the confusion about trusting themselves and trusting their perceptions of reality that comes from that experience of basically being trained out of trusting themselves since they were a little kid. Your mom is trying to hide something, and so when you call her on it, she denies it. Or there's abuse, or there's alcoholism, and there's all the smoke and mirrors that come along with that. As a little kid, you're super aware of all of that, but then you're told you're wrong and that you don't know anything. And then you internalize it. And then you spend a lot of your life thinking that you're crazy. And maybe you experience that with other people. Other people are doing weird shady things. And then when you call them on it, they're like, no, it's all you. What are you talking about? And then you go back to thinking that you're crazy. Well, guess what? You're not crazy. You probably just know a lot of things and see a lot of things that other people don't want you to see. And if you would just really acknowledge it and acknowledge that there's some validity to your perceptions, it might bring you to a greater place of sanity and peace of mind.
Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that insight into, what you've been able to uncover now, because it's truly so important to share the new concepts and lessons that you're continuously learning. I think, that's something that mental health really creates, is that it's always an everyday process. We're always learning something each day, each year, and it's such a transformational phase within our life. There's constantly different areas of improvement that we can make, and I'm so happy that we were able to speak about that phase, that really that understanding that you've been able to uncover now. I'm so thankful that we were able to have this conversation. I really look forward to everybody listening to this podcast episode. I think it'll provide great insight to everybody who's listening. We really touched on only a few topics that we've really been able to speak about thus far, but I really look forward to another follow-up interview. We can speak more about a lot of these different changes and different
Mhm.
topics within the mental health field, because there's so much to still uncover.
So
There's
topic could be, yeah,
exact
absolutely. Totally agree.
exactly there's so much that we can
So
speak
much.
on, but it truly was a pleasure to speak with you today. It was really a wonderful interview, and I really want to make sure that everybody can get all of the links towards your work. So we'll have that in the show notes, and we'll make sure that my audience gets connected with
Mhm.
you. And
Mhm.
really, we start to create more of change within this field. And I believe this one conversation made one more step forward within this field. So I just want to thank you again, Elana, for being on here today and offering your time with myself and my audience.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Of course, it was truly my pleasure. I had a wonderful time speaking with you and understanding more about the work that you do and the insights that you
Mhm.
have on such an important field. Mental health is something that needs substantial efforts and change within, and I believe that the future is bright. The conversations need to continue, and
Mhm.
it's all about progress moving forward. So as we continue pushing this message and this mission and this conversation, I think we'll continue to make some forward progress.
I sure hope so. And just my own experience, like I'm in such a better place than I have been ever, and I watch my clients transform their own lives, and so there really is hope out there, and there really is something greater possible.
That's so great to hear. Thank you, Elena. It truly was a pleasure, and I look forward to continuing our connection and really moving forward within this field and creating some valuable change for others to make change and overcome some of the same issues that we've really faced today, and how we can help others experiencing, different thought patterns and experiences throughout their own life.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.